Hello, everybody. This is Mark Vines, and I want to welcome you to the Mark Vines Show. Today, I want to talk about the promotional system in the FBI and how that system contributed to the management and leadership problems that the FBI has today. This is important as we explore how the FBI got into the predicament that it's in, and later we're going to talk about what it is that we can do to improve the FBI, because after all, the FBI is certainly an institution that we have to have in this country, we want to have, and it is vital to the national security and to law enforcement. However, the system that's in place right now is broken. I believe it's continuing to be broken, and it needs to be fixed. But in order to fix something, you always have to understand how it came to be in the first place, the reasoning behind it, how it's not working, and then later on we're going to talk about what we can do to improve it. So that's what I want to walk through today. And in order to understand the process, I want to go back and just describe how the process works itself. Now, in the FBI, as an agent, if you want to promote, and the way that it works is you come into the FBI, you go through the academy, and your promotion for the first few pay grades is, for the most part, automatic, up through the GS-13 level. That's the street agent level. Then, like I talked about in a previous episode, for you to go into management, which would be GS-14 and above, and then on up into the senior executive service or the SES levels, you raise your hand for that, and there's a whole process in how that works. But for you to go into management, the first step is going to be for you to go into FBI headquarters, with some exceptions. There's what's known as stationary desks in the office, but that's another discussion. But for most people, you have to do a stint at headquarters, and you apply for a position there. And you do that by filling out what's known as an FD 954, which is your application for a position which is posted. So you see the availability of the positions in the organization, and then you apply for that. Now, this is where the system starts to break down, in my opinion. When you fill out this FD 954, you are responding to a position posting in the organization. The way that that works is you fill this application out, and the application will have various skills that you are responding to. For example, leadership, collaboration, organization, planning, those types of things. And each job that's posted will have different requirements for that position. And then you will give two different examples of things that you have done in your career to fulfill those requirements. You do that by putting in your experiences, and then your education level and everything else that you've done in your career, and you apply for the position. This is where I believe that the whole process is a facade in and of itself, because in reality, and I saw this over 20 plus years, the fact is that people that are in a unit, the leaders in a particular unit, when they post a position, by and large, know who they want to bring into their unit and can write these postings in ways that it's specifically written for a particular person they want to bring in to their particular unit, and they have the ability to stack the deck of sorts to bring the people, to ensure the people that they want in their unit are the ones that are in fact selected for that particular position. So they can write requirements, they can write mandatory requirements or preferred requirements for a particular position, whether those requirements are in fact needed for that position or not. So the system is flawed from the very get-go. You have to then write in your FD 954 to that position, and you have to be able to cover those areas. The person that's in charge of that unit, when they see the respondents to a particular posting, they can look at who those people are. They know who is applying. And if they don't like the candidates that are there, or if the person that they really want to be in that position don't in fact apply to the position, they can actually pull the post until the person they want actually responds to the post. So that's a little dicey to begin with. So they can pull that posting, or if the wrong people in their minds apply for a position, they can pull it as well, and then add a requirement that they know that that person does not have, and then that way it eliminates them from the posting altogether. So I've always felt over the years that the system was stacked to begin with. If someone applies to a position, once that position, the candidates for that position are in the mix, then they put together what's known as a career board, which is made up of the leader of that unit, and then usually 3 different supervisors from that particular unit. Right? And again, we're talking about agents here. There's other processes in the organization, but with the agents, it's people from that unit that are supervisors or people of that pay grade or higher that sit on that particular board. It's not uncommon for the leader of that particular unit to sort of put the bug in the ear of the people that are going to sit on that board and let them know who their preferences are for that position. And in theory, anybody that is sitting on the board, if they have any derogatory information about someone that has applied, or if it's somebody that they know, if it's a friend of theirs, they're supposed to recuse themselves from sitting on that board. But I can tell you from experience that that's not reality, that people sit on the board and will have opinions even though they should not have opinions of the people that are applying. But it in fact does happen. So they get together, they have the board where the unit leader of the unit is the chairperson of that particular board, and then they go through the FD 954s, look at the qualifications of each person as submitted, and that's key too, is understand that the people that are responding to the requirements for the job actually fill that out, and they're supposed to have what are known as verifiers, meaning people that can verify the information that is listed in the document. But I can tell you that people can, in fact, do lie on that, on the requirements, or exaggerate the requirements, and the person that they have verifying either doesn't have complete knowledge of it, or maybe covering for someone or encouraging them. But it's a really flawed system in that the backup process and the verification process is not all that stringent. So people get in, they have their 954, the board talks about the candidates, and then they rank those candidates. And then based upon that ranking of the particular candidates for position then goes up the chain of command. And then at that point, the people in the chain of command can in fact override the placement of candidates that the board came up with. And I can tell you that happens quite a few times where somebody that's up the chain of command, whether it's a section chief, deputy assistant director, so on and so forth, will decide that their person was not ranked by the board, and they can then overturn the rankings of the board. So it's a very flawed system and very ripe for abuse and very ripe for people exaggerating their qualifications, their abilities in a particular position. And that happens quite a bit. So when you think about some of the things that I've walked you through in episodes 1 and episodes 2 about how the FBI system works, it's very easy to abuse the system. It's very easy to get the people that you want under you to come in and work for you. It's not fair in any way, shape, or form. It's not applied equally and evenly, fairly across the FBI. And it makes it very easy for people that want to have like-minded individuals work in a particular unit. It's very easy for that to happen. And I can tell you, over the 20 years that I was in the Bureau, I'd seen that quite a bit. In fact, I remember years ago, I had applied for a position that I thought I was very qualified. It was almost like the posting had been written for me. And in the posting, I wrote to it, and I ended up not getting the job. Years later, I ended up talking to the person who, in fact, got the job. And it turns out that that particular individual knew the unit chief that had put the posting out. And he told me flat out that the unit chief wanted him to get the position and had written the requirements in that position for him, thereby guaranteeing that he would get the position, and then spoke with each person that was on the career board, telling each one of those members on the career board who he wanted to be in that position, thereby tainting the process and ensuring that the board would vote and rank this particular individual number one so they would get the position. And now keep in mind, the supervisors that sat on the board worked for this particular unit chief, so for their own survival, they were going to comply with the wishes of the unit chief. And that's just one example that I experienced over the years of the system being abused, but I could give countless stories of where that would happen. Now, how this applies to the subject that we've had over the last couple of episodes is that is the system that's applied throughout FBI headquarters, and people get who they want in the system and in the units that they want. Very easy to do. So, very flawed system, and it's something that really needs to be corrected. You know, in the military, a lot of people in the FBI like to compare the military promotional system to the FBI system. They're not like one another at all in any shape or form. The military system of promotion is much more fair. And in fact, the The promotional system is sort of blind tested, meaning that names of people are excluded. There are certain ratings that are applied across the board, whether it be education, experience, those types of things. And people are rated, and those ratings are what goes forward and determines whether somebody gets promoted or not. I believe that in the FBI, for the FBI to ever have a really fair system, promotional system, and a system that will weed out sort of the nepotism, names of people will have to be removed from the application process. And it will just have to be the education and the experience that each person has that is listed in the application, and that alone is evaluated. I mentioned earlier that when people are responding to the different skill sets that are being analyzed, whether it's organization, planning, liaison, communication, so on and so forth, and the different requirements you have to respond to, you give 2 examples that you pick and choose as to what you want the board to evaluate. Now, I know by the time I was applying for jobs, I had been working either as a naval officer or a police officer, an FBI agent. We're talking, 20 plus years worth of experience, and a lot of it very vast experience. And there was no way for me to show in an FD 954 the breadth of my experience and the breadth of I couldn't cover every single case I had worked on, the Title III wiretaps, the undercover operations, the flying that I did, because I was also a bureau pilot and I've been a pilot in the Navy. All these different things and managing all of these different people and, hundreds of people that I had managed and huge budgets, $1 million plus budgets that I had managed. There is no way to be able to express that in the 954 for the board to see. And I will also want to point out that you may not get an interview with this particular unit chief or with the board. You can do a verbal interview over the phone if the board decides to do that, but they don't always decide to do that. So I always thought that it was a very false premise that I am applying for a position, I don't meet these people, I don't talk to them, and they see 2 examples of a 20-plus year career of my ability. And there was no way that this board and maybe a 5-10 minute phone conversation could ever get the sense of what I had done in my career. Very poor promotional system, very ripe for abuse, and really is geared towards you wanting or you hiring somebody that you want to have. So it is very common in the FBI to bring people into your unit. If you're a unit chief, you're a leader, bring in people that you already know that you've worked with in the past. And in a way, they almost have to do that because by looking at the system, looking at the applications, the way that I've just explained them to you, it's not possible, even for a unit chief that wants to be fair in this promotional process, to be fair because there's no way that you can understand the background of the candidate. So what are you going to do? The default is going to be, well, I will hire the person that I have worked with in the past. So I think that helps to explain how we got to the position we are today. And if you wonder about how McCabe and Strzok and Page and all of these other people were together, and it did seem like these people were very intimate with one another. They knew each other. They were protecting each other. And you think, how is it that they go from office to office, all working in the same group together with really no one coming in and questioning or checking or balancing what they've been doing? How does that happen? Well, I think this process that I just explained to you helps explain that. And it is something that needs to be changed in the future. It is a very poor promotional system, and it is a system that needs to be addressed, it needs to be corrected, and it needs to be fair. Names need to be taken out. They need to look at people's careers, the entire career, and then hire the most appropriate person for that position. One other thing that Mueller did in regards to the promotional system years ago is he started this idea that agents really needed to broaden their experience. And what I mean by broaden their experience is the American public needs to understand that the FBI covers probably 700 or more criminal violations. And in those 700 or more criminal violations, there are very different types of things that are looked at, from criminal investigations to counterterrorism investigations, both international and domestic, and counterintelligence. A lot of different things that the FBI looks at that requires very different skill sets and training. For example, a criminal agent and a counterintelligence agent are very different in the way that they approach cases, the rules, the regulations, the processes that are utilized to investigate those cases, and very, very, very different. And you need to have a breadth of experience in those particular cases to really understand how they're done and be effective in that. Counterterrorism agents have very specific training and rules and regulations that they must file. But years ago, when Mueller, and then later when Comey was the director, there was this idea that you really needed to work a lot of different things in the Bureau. And what that meant was, let's say you're a bank robbery criminal agent, for you to really expand your career and to promote, you really need to go work counterterrorism for a while, or you needed to work counterintelligence, you needed to do all these different things. So the idea was that, you might be working bank robberies in the field, and then you would promote, and you would be encouraged to go to, say, a counterterrorism unit at headquarters, where now you're the program manager, you're the supervisor overseeing counterterrorism cases across the country. Now, it may be you've never worked a counterterrorism case in your life, but now you're at FBI headquarters and you're overseeing, not working cases, but overseeing cases that involve counterterrorism, but you have no experience in that whatsoever. And I remember talking to agents that I had met at headquarters that I used to know in the field, and I would ask them how they were doing. And they would say, well, I'm overseeing counterterrorism. And they would laugh and they'd say, the funny thing is, I don't know the first thing about counterterrorism, but here I am overseeing all of these different cases across the country. That's not an effective way of doing business. I think that what will have to happen in the future in the FBI is that you get back into sort of that specialist mode, which was more the way Louis Freeh looked at it, and that was that once you get into the FBI, you might work some things, but you eventually fall into your niche, and that becomes your thing, whether it's bank robberies, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's white-collar crime, healthcare fraud, counterintelligence, whatever the case may be. But you become a specialist and you become an expert in that area, and in that area, that's what you do for the rest of your career. And by the time you retired, you are genuinely known as an expert in that field. But that's not what Mueller did. That is not what Comey did. They wanted that breadth of experience. In theory, I understand that. I understand why you would want that broad experience. But for what we do, this is not necessarily about getting as much experience as you can in a lot of different areas. The work that the FBI does is so serious and so important, and it is so important that we get it right. You have to have an organization full of experts in fields. And I can tell you, in each one of these fields, there are details, there are nuances of the law, of how the cases are operated, whether you're going to be using a T3 wiretap, whether you're going to be using FISAs, whether you're going to be using various sophisticated techniques. You must become an expert in those fields, particularly for when you go into court and you have to testify. And you cannot blend the things, because the rules and the policies and the procedures that are used in a counterintelligence case are wildly different than what you will use in a criminal case or a counterterrorism case. Criminal cases and counterterrorism cases are much more symbiotic than a counterintelligence case would ever be. And the problem that we've had over the years, and we have seen this with what's going on right now with the FBI, is that people at very high levels now who've gone and worked with all these broad experiences now blend all of these matters together. For example, a counterintelligence case now delving into the criminal world where these agents really have no experience in court and prosecutions and being cross-examined in court now are in positions where that's exactly what's going to have to happen. And since they have no experience, it's created a lot of problems. For example, if you look at Lisa Page and you look at Peter Strzok, this is how you know they had no experience with being criminal agents. One, they are talking about cases on their bureau phone on texts. Now, these are agents that know that everything that they put onto that government phone is being monitored, is saved, and is discoverable. By discoverable, what I mean is if you end up in a court of law, when you end up in a court of law, all of that information must be turned over to the defense. And it can and will be used against you in cross-examination when you're in court. Every criminal agent knows that. But Peter Strzok wasn't a criminal agent. He was a counterintelligence agent. No one in their right mind as a criminal agent would have ever put onto a government server information about the people that they were investigating. But Page instructed that countless times. I mean, we're all very familiar with that in the press. But no criminal agent would have ever done that. So it showed the lack of experience. The other thing is that he should have known that by showing the bias that he had would have been used against him in a court of law. This case with Peter Strzok on a stand would have never stood cross-examination. Never. And he should have known that and never done what he did. Also, I think the American public and in the press is failing to understand is this. Why was Peter Strzok fired? He was fired for lack of candor, was he? Was he not? He was fired because he lied. Therefore, he would have what's known as giglio issues, meaning his bias would have had to have been reported to defense attorneys, and with that bias and the fact that he had lied and been fired for that, his case would have never made it in a court of law. And it's pretty interesting because General Flynn is being charged with false statements. Peter Strzok was fired for false statements. But yet, at some point, Peter Strzok would have had to go into court and testify against General Flynn about false statements. So it makes no sense whatsoever. But how all of this could have been prevented was a counterintelligence agent like that not being promoted to the position that he was in, and he got to where he was because of the nepotism that was involved. And tomorrow I'm going to be doing an interview with an individual that's going to be talking about Peter Strzok's trajectory up the chain and how quick that was. That was a mistake in and of itself, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. But he should have never been placed in that position. And here's something else that the press needs to be asking, and that is this. Peter Strzok was a deputy assistant director in the FBI. He was an SES. He was not a street agent anymore. He had not been a street agent for God knows how long. Why was he doing these interviews? Why was he a principal interviewer in the Hillary Clinton investigation, and then the Flynn investigation, and then the Russia investigations? It all comes back to this one guy. But I've not heard anybody ask the one basic question, and that is, why was a deputy assistant director doing interviews in the first place? I can tell you, in my 20-plus years in the FBI, I never saw anybody at that level doing interviews. Not once. Let me think about this for a minute. Let's say I'm a field agent out there in a field office and I'm doing an investigation. And you have to understand that most street agents have very little confidence whatsoever in even their supervisors or the supervisors going into an interview. Certainly nobody above that level. The people that do interviews are the street level agents. That's what you do as a street level agent day in and day out. Every single day you are doing interviews. I have never considered, and I've never heard of a street agent saying, hey, you know what? I'm having problems with this interview. I think I'm going to go have my supervisor sit in, or I'm going to have an ASAC or an SAC, or let's go to an assistant director set in. I've never heard someone do that. In fact, I can tell you I would have never wanted someone at that level sitting in at my interview with my interviews. But that's exactly what happened here, and I don't hear the press talking about that. Why was somebody at this level doing interviews? Isn't that what street agents are supposed to do? Now, in Peter Strzok's case, and I don't hear the press talking about this very much, is remember, there was another agent that was in the room. And there's a lot of talk about Peter Strzok and about Lisa Page, but you don't hear a lot said about the other agent that was in the room. Remember, an FD 302 was filled out by Peter Strzok and this other agent. And only those two can change what was in that FD 302. And an FD 302 is a report of an investigation, meaning the results of that interview. Those are the only two that can have an input into that. But if you recall, Peter Strzok allowed Lisa Page to have input into the FD 302. Now, Lisa Page was A, not part of the interview, and B, is not a special agent. And we're going to talk about that a bit more too. Why is somebody who is not a special agent even involved in this process, and why in the world was she allowed to have input in an interview that she was not part of? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I wanted to give you some background on that process as we go through this, and I'm trying to help you understand how the FBI works, the process, and then ultimately we're going to get into how we can fix all of this. So I hope this was educational for you. I hope it's something that will help you wrap your head around what's going on in the news right now, because it really frustrates me to listen to the news and hear people talk about this whole situation, and they're not asking the basic questions about the process itself and how is a law enforcement organization supposed to operate. And I don't blame people. I think they don't really understand it. And that's why we're going through this process, is so I can help you understand how this is supposed to work, how it doesn't work, and more importantly, how we can fix it so it can work in the future. Because the FBI is a great organization, a lot of great people in the organization. That's why I'm going through this, because I care about the people that are still there. I believe that the FBI is a very important part of our fabric. It's an important part of the country. It is something that we need for our national security, but something must be done. Something must be done. And I'll tell you, Christopher Wray is not doing enough to fix this. He needs to do more. And we, as the American public, need to demand more from the people that are in these positions, from our leaders, and we need to keep that coming. And the only way that we can do that is if you are educated in what's going on behind the scenes and going back and understanding some history as to why we have these organizations, the roles of the organizations, their purpose, and how we can keep these organizations preserved in order to protect the American people. And that's important. So with that, guys, thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please give me a like. Please give me a shout out. Please follow me on whatever platform you're listening to. And also visit the Mark Vine Show on Facebook. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and some of the other outlets. Look forward to seeing you soon. And let's keep America strong. See you soon.